My lords, there are 4 so-called crisis paths. We have witnessed countless empires attempting to pursue these over the years. They range from an alleged ascension to a higher plane of existence via tearing into the shroud, cooking the galaxy, attempting to consume it via the transfer of consciousness into a behemoth, or simply rewriting reality and leaving it entirely. But today we're going to address the question of which is the strongest. I will say at this point, they are all clearly quite good, but at different things, though there is currently in my eyes one massive outlier which will destroy all of them if given the chance. Today, with the help of Voltum simulation technology, we are going to assess and rank them in strength. I certainly hope to be able to answer the question, which is the strongest of the crisis paths. To do this, we'll run a simulation and spawn the same empire 4 times and give each access to a crisis path. The empires will be given no civics or traits, all will have the same origin. The only difference is the empire attempting galactic hyperthermia will be thermophiles. The rest will be organic, and of course Behemoth Fury will use organic ships. I'll leave the simulation to run while we discuss the various crisis paths, and of course I'll be taking bets on the victors of the simulation. Get them in the comments nice and early. But my lords, I'm happy to begin with your feedback on this very question. Indeed, as of recording, almost 4,000 of you have answered my question. Which of the player-driven crisis paths do you believe is the strongest? 12% of you had voted for Nemesis, 73, an overwhelming majority, have voted Cosmogenesis, 10% of you Behemoth Fury, and only 6% think it's Galactic Hyperthermia. Indeed, most of the top comments also address the fact that Fallen Empire technologies are very powerful, and that Cosmogenesis is literally universe altering, which is fair because the others only really impact the galaxy that you're in. There's also chat that perhaps the end of the cycle should count here, but as it's not a crisis path unlocked by Ascension, we're not going to include it. Although I suspect, given the Endbringer's aura, it would have a very high power ceiling indeed. But enough from the floor. It's certainly important at this stage to acknowledge the various paths certainly have different strengths and weaknesses. For example, Cosmogenesis, which the majority of you have voted as being the most powerful, may very well have the highest ceiling in terms of overall power, but I think it takes much longer to reach this peak versus, say, Nemesis, which is something we'll explore. I also think it's worth acknowledging that although I've tested the AI in this simulation, they can all play the crisis path, they do appear to be struggling somewhat. Namely, progressing Behemoth Fury, I cannot get the AI to build the egg. It never quite seems to acquire the numbers of food and influence, 50,000 and 300, in order to start progressing by building the Behemoth egg. Similarly, Galactic Hyperthermia, the AI doesn't always build the megastructure. I have seen it sometimes, and I haven't seen it other times, which is frustrating. And of course, the AI doesn't build the synaptic lathe when playing Cosmogenesis, which means generally Nemesis has an advantage when you let all the AI play because it gets the megastructure for free, and it will upgrade the megastructure if it has the appropriate dark matter. But all that brings us on to the perceptions of the weakest and the strongest crisis, and I'll discuss mechanical and lore implications, and maybe even touch on levels of content as well. But with no further ado, let's begin with Galactic Hyperthermia, which I think is the weakest of the 4 crisis paths. Conceptually, Galactic Hyperthermia is certainly the simplest of the crisis paths. An empire pursuing this crisis path wants to heat up the galaxy, cook it if you will, and this is because they're thermophiles, and they quite literally like the heat. Although oddly, it does appear you don't have to be a thermophile to take the perk, so make that make sense. Anyone pursuing Galactic Hyperthermia has to unlock a resource called crystallized entropy. This is a rather interesting resource indeed. Essentially, it allows the Empire to bypass traditional energy constraints by harvesting chaos to power their industry. We're still not really sure how crystallized entropy works. To scale this up, one must then build a megastructure, a multi-stage megastructure, called the Galactic Crucible. This investment will soon begin to pay dividends as it begins synthesizing the entropy crystals on a much larger scale than you were previously capable of. The Empire will then learn about entropy conduits. These are a bit like stellar terraformers. You can send them into stars within your borders and change stars into red giants. Red giants are much larger than regular G-class stars, making your systems much hotter and your industry much more efficient. Essentially, you're terraforming stars to better suit your thermophile species. Interestingly, Galactic Hyperthermia has a choice at stage 3. You can lean into the destruction of the galaxy, at least for everyone else, and attempt to turn all the stars into red giants, or you can ease back, sabotage your own galactic crucible, and return to somewhat of a regular empire. Of course, to progress it, you have to choose to fan the flames, which is the aggressive choice, and this will continue the crisis path. But at this stage you will become a galactic threat. You will also unlock the ability to use entropy conduits offensively, turning enemy stars into red giants, which will of course wreck their planets and infrastructure. Upon reaching the final crisis stage, the goal will shift to the galactic core. 6 new systems will be discovered. These must be fortified, and entropy conduits will be built in these 6 systems. At this point, the galactic community will get an alert, and the entire galaxy will declare you a crisis and attempt to stop the events going on in the galactic core. If you as the Empire is able to successfully hold these systems while the timer ticks down, they will trigger the thermal cascade. Every star in the galaxy is instantly converted to a Class M red giant. The heat will be so intense that most rival empires will be wiped out or crippled. Every planet that is not an Ecumenopolis will be terraformed into a volcanic world, and every species without the thermophile trait or the Galactic Hyperthermia Ascension perk will be destroyed, and this includes any ongoing endgame crisis level event. You as a thermophile and any remaining thermophile species will have the galaxy to yourselves to do with as you wish. Now, Galactic Hyperthermia, as you would expect, offers tremendous power versus any regular empire. Its offensive capability can be measured in Ember starships it gains access to, and the ability to change the star classes disturbing your galactic neighbours. However, I think it's the weakest for several reasons. Firstly, the ships, although powerful indeed, I don't think quite compete with menacing ships or Star Eaters in terms of power or theme, and also when you take the economy into effect as well. Although I would state that that's carried strongly by the Star Eaters, as they are fantastic and of course able to destroy entire star systems. And it seems to me like you, the community, agree with this take, since as of writing only 6% of you rank Galactic Hyperthermia as the strongest crisis, which of course I accept doesn't necessarily mean it's the weakest, but nevertheless. I would say Galactic Hyperthermia's defining ability is that you can reach a game-ending conclusion remarkably quickly, perhaps even faster than Nemesis, though I'm not necessarily sure that a game ending quickly is always a measure of an enjoyable experience. In any case, that is where I see Galactic Hyperthermia's power. It receives its power quickly, but I also think it peaks out lower than the other crisis level events. Let's move on to the original crisis, Nemesis. I think Nemesis is the second weakest overall, but like Galactic Hyperthermia can also come online incredibly quickly. Conceptually, from the outside, Nemesis is very straightforward. They're genocidal, they want to destroy everyone and everything throughout the galaxy. There is perhaps a deeper internal purpose, which we will get to. As they progress through the various crisis stages, they'll begin to receive massive bonuses to naval and military capabilities. Their key feature is their menacing ships, which cost minerals rather than alloys, meaning they can be pumped out in much larger quantities than regular ships. There's also interactions with Archaeotech, where you don't get charged relics for putting Archaeotech on menacing ships, increasing their potential power that much further. Level 5, the final crisis stage, is where Nemesis really begins to shine, as they will get access to their unique megastructure, the Athrophasic Engine. This is the engine that will attempt to tear apart the literal fabric of the universe and allegedly propel your people to an ascension in a higher plane of existence. The construction requires staggering quantities of dark matter, and this forces you to acquire and build a Star Eater, which is essentially a way that you can farm this dark matter. Star Eaters, as the name suggests, are colossal mobile megastructures. They're cuboid in shape, and they hold the power of a Juggernaut and a Colossus combined. They carry a vast array of regular weapons, but their real power comes in the form of their Star Cracker. This takes approximately 90 days to charge and 30 to fire. When it's done, the star is consumed entirely by a black hole, every planet in the system is obliterated, and the Empire will get to harvest the resulting dark matter from the star's destruction. The feeding of the atherophasic engine takes some time, but the Empire at this stage will be as powerful as it's going to get. They have access to their cheap but strong warships, and they can pump them out in ridiculous quantities. The engine itself has 5 stages, and it provides your Empire with energy and minerals, but frankly in fairly low quantities, though these do increase as you go through the stages. As the engine moves through the 5 stages, the shroud will begin to bleed into the material plane, reality will become thin, psionic static fills the air, and the galaxy will watch on in horror as their stars will be systematically extinguished to power your ascension. When the 5th stage is activated, your ascension is complete. The engine will fire and a subspace backlash will occur. Every single star in the galaxy will detonate simultaneously into a black hole, and every living creature in the galaxy will be erased. Your species will shed its physical form. Allegedly, they will leave the charred dark remains of the galaxy behind to become immortal godlike entities within the shroud. Or at least that's what they think will happen. We actually have no evidence for that occurring whatsoever. In conclusion, Nemesis is powerful indeed, and it's quick to receive its power levels. In a situation where a Nemesis Empire must fight the other 3 Crisis Empires, I suspect Nemesis would do quite well, as in fairness, I think Galactic Hyperthermia would do quite well, because they don't have to wait an awfully long time before coming online and reaching the peak of their power. However, against a strong endgame Crisis level threat, for example Zatanna or the Contingency, while Nemesis is still powerful, I don't think it has the peaks available to the other 2 to come, Behemoth Fury and Cosmogenesis. Of course, I'm sure some will argue that you could have destroyed the galaxy by that point, which is very true and a very fair statement to make, but nevertheless, because I think its peak isn't quite as high as the other 2, this is why it's in 2nd place. And I do think it's quite close between Nemesis and Galactic Hyperthermia. I also think the lore implications of Nemesis are far more interesting to explore and have more depth to them than that of Galactic Hyperthermia, although that may just be the nature of the beast. However, my lords, it would appear that you think Nemesis is stronger than Behemoth Fury. I'm going to suggest you're wrong, but we'll touch on that later. Indeed, moving on to number 3, the 2nd strongest Crisis path, and potentially the path with the highest peak, if left alone at least, Cosmogenesis. Cosmogenesis is often described as the technology Crisis path, and for very good reason. It's not inherently violent like the other 3, though that doesn't mean it's pleasant for the rest of the galaxy either. The ultimate goal of Cosmogenesis is to leave our galaxy, universe, and reality entirely, in order to find somewhere less established and more flexible to the reality edits that you'll become able to make. All of this technological progress is tied to a megastructure called the Synaptic Lathe. This is a marvellous creation that runs on organic lithoid and machine minds. These people are essentially used as biological processors. They generate massive amounts of research, but they quickly burn out and die. This allows the Empire to reach levels of research simply unobtainable to regular empires, and it also allows them to understand and create Fallen Empire technology all by themselves and in considerably less time than it took the Fallen Empires. As the Empire progresses down the path of Cosmogenesis, they'll begin to experiment with editing reality. These are a galactic level roll of the dice, and can come with both positive and negative interactions. And this is where it gets its name for a crisis, because you can really mess things up for the galaxy. For example, the worst of which is when you accidentally change the speed of light, setting several planets on fire. Perhaps the folks at Galactic Hyperthermia would enjoy that one. In any case, the Cosmogenesis project will progress, and eventually you'll be able to construct a Horizon Needle. This is a unique ship that can be used to transport your entire civilization through a black hole to a fresh reality. But why have I ranked it as the 2nd strongest? Well, its potential for power. I will absolutely concede that Cosmogenesis has the slowest power curve of all the player-led crisis paths, but I do think it's fair to say it has the highest peak. Access to the Fallen Empire technologies, the buildings as well as ships, on top of the potential of the lathe, means you can hit technology numbers that are simply unfeasible for other empires to achieve. Add this to the power of Fallen Empire ships, particularly Riddle escorts, which are arguably the best ships in the entire galaxy, and the fact that at no point does the galaxy declare you a total war crisis, it just further cements that Cosmogenesis is an absolute powerhouse. I'll note that this is even after substantial nerfs slowing its progress down. Clearly, however, my lords, you disagree, with an overarching majority believing that Cosmogenesis is the strongest. Now, I can read this in a number of ways, and I accept responsibility for the looseness of the question I asked. In terms of lore, clearly Cosmogenesis offers the most potential power, without question. You literally learn how to edit reality. I also think that Cosmogenesis is by far the most accessible to play. It doesn't come with a galactic war against you like the others, and nor does it require any particularly aggressive play. You can take it quietly and coast along, increasing your tech at a quicker rate than everyone else, and for the most part you'll be left alone. You can even choose not to use the lathe, if that suits you, but eventually you will scale into a total powerhouse capable of galactic domination. I should also note that Cosmogenesis has by far the best ending. Whereas the other two crises that we've discussed so far, the game simply ends, Cosmogenesis, not only can you choose your ending via the black holes, and there is a substantial number, I think 11 at last count, you can also then choose to play in a post-Cosmogenesis galaxy, which is affected by your choices in the original galaxy. I'm talking about the Knights of the Toxic God and the end of the cycle here. But now, my lords, we must come on to the strongest player crisis. And surprisingly, not many of you perceive this one to be quite as powerful as it is. Behemoth Fury. The galaxy has witnessed many civilizations attempt to transcend the material plane through cosmic engines or pacts with the Shroud, but empires attempting Behemoth Fury choose a path far more visceral and, frankly, unprecedented. Empires with this ambition attempt to shed their biological weakness by merging their superior intellect with the formidable, yet potentially purposeless physiology of a great void-dwelling leviathan, the Behemoth. This begins with the construction of a gargantuan zygote protected by a specialized cell that's designed to absorb cosmic energy. The Empire must first figure out how to stabilize the DNA for such a creature, and then sacrifice nearly all of their food stockpiles on creating such a beast. After a decade of gestation and the consumption of incalculable nutrients, the Behemoth will finally emerge. However, you will soon quickly realize that the creature possesses a ravenous and uncontrollable instinct that will ignore all your commands. You must learn to tame the beast. To solve this, you will turn to experimental neurotechnology, realizing that the single mind was insufficient to ground the creature. You must transform your capital into a massive connection hub, preparing to link the collective mental weight of your entire species to the Behemoth's nervous system. Fueling the Behemoth's growth will continue to cost you a relentless supply of biomaterial. The Behemoth, despite its juvenile state, will consume all in its path, and this cycle will continue until the creature finally becomes a Class 3, at which point it will be the most titanic lifeform the galaxy has ever seen. As its growth peaks, you will finally learn how to mind meld with the creature. During this time, your population will be willingly consumed by this mind meld. Essentially, your individual identity will be dissolved into the torrent of rage and shared consciousness of the beast. The final test of your empire's newfound so-called godhood will arrive in the form of the Elder Voidspawn, an ancient and supposedly invincible entity that will sense the Behemoth's rise to power. In a clash of cosmic titans, you will battle the Voidspawn and thus hold the fate of the galaxy in your hand, or perhaps in your claw. As my graphic suggests, the Behemoth as it stands is capable of reaching power at an incredibly quick rate, given how easy it is to acquire feral insight. In fact, you can have enough feral insight within the first 20 years to progress all the way to level 5. What will slow you down is the ability to make and hatch an egg. This costs 50,000 food and 300 influence. However, hatching this egg provides you with a baby Behemoth in the region of 100,000 fleet power. If you can do that quick enough, you can do this far more quickly than any of the other crisis paths can reach that level of fleet power, or indeed quicker than anything else can get near to 100k, effectively meaning you can eat the entire galaxy before anyone else stands a chance. And indeed, in terms of respect for peak overall power, the Behemoth can more or less single-handedly defeat a 25x Crisis via its thermoclastic roar, and simply the fact that it hits its power curve so much quicker than any of the other empires. Furthermore, Behemoth Fury gave us a fantastic lore ending, referencing the so-called Hunters. We found the strength of the Hunters to be absolute when they quite literally folded our Behemoth in two. And certainly the in-lore implications of a battle between a Behemoth Fury Empire and a Cosmogenesis Empire, both at their peak, would be glorious to uphold. Fallen Empire escorts weaving around the Behemoth's colossal weaponry as it spits out another fleet of maulers, a race against time to stop the Behemoth reaching the lathe and putting a stop to Cosmogenesis's technological progression. What a wonderful tale that could be. But I'll end this talking about the simulation. Of course, the simulation ended exactly the opposite to the way that I ranked them. It quite frankly wouldn't be cricket if it turned up any other way. I believe that the reason the simulation ended the way it did was quite frankly because the Behemoth Empire never builds an egg. And that's because although the AI can do it, it has to have 50,000 food and 300 influence. Because it's constantly expanding and growing, it just doesn't do it. In this case, the Galactic Hyperthermia Empire also never built the megastructure. Now, I have done this sim more than once, and in previous sims they did build the megastructure, although you'll be interested to know that the result was exactly the same. The Galactic Hyperthermia Empire is just able to dominate. Cosmogenesis, I think it's fair to say, just never gets going, and they're not going to build the synaptic lathe either because of the way the empire is set up. Nemesis was weaker than I expected it to be, and perhaps if I'd done the simulation before I wrote and recorded the report, maybe I'd switch Nemesis and Galactic Hyperthermia. I do think they're quite close, and I do think in the hands of players, I think Nemesis would probably win overall, but my lords, as ever, I appreciate your thoughts.